Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The political conversation turns to what is to be done with the disruption in the Republican Party, with the disruption in the Democratic Party. By the way, there's yet another debate right now, coterminous, on PBS, I believe, between Mrs. Clinton, the former Secretary of State, and Senator Bernie Sanders. They will enjoin the same conversation they've had for some weeks now, which is who can go more to the left of left in order to gain the attention of the progressives, enthusiastically supporting Senator Sanders in New Hampshire, enthusiastically supporting Senator Sanders in Iowa. They're on to a Nevada caucus and a South Carolina vote later this month. Mona Charen, the National Review Online, joins me now because we're going to discuss both parties in terms of this word, demagogue. Demagogue. It's Greek, of course. We can blame the Athenians for this. What it means literally is the people's leader, leader of the people, demagogue. It's not a cartoon figure. It's not some character out of the past whom we brush aside because we're always victorious. Demagogue is a leader in a democracy, someone who has the attention of the demos, that's the voters. Demos is a worry, has been for 240 years for this republic. Our founding brethren worried about the demos. That's why they inserted this republic idea. You elect a representative who goes to the national government and represents his constituency to avoid what they feared, mob rule. Here we have not a mob, but you'd have to say a voice in both parties that is inarticulate but enthusiastic about demagoguery. And Mona writes about it in the National Review Online. Mona, a very good evening to you. I'm very pleased that you're here to help explain both the Republicans first and the Democrats second in terms of demagogue. First, this anecdote. Larry Kudlow, my colleague and your colleague at the National Review Online, returning from New Hampshire, he was there to report for CNBC, told the story on air the other night, the night of the New Hampshire primary, that his cab driver, a young man, Larry asked him, no turns of phrase here, who are you thinking of voting for? And he said, well, I can't make up my mind between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. Mona, I'm stumped. Politically, philosophically, that makes no sense. Bernie Sanders represents someone who wants to confiscate the wealth of the United States, $17 trillion, and make college and, to my knowledge, all of life free on the public till. Whereas Donald Trump represents a 45% confiscatory, protectionist war beginning with China and Japan and Mexico that would beggar the United States indefinitely. How do these two philosophies go together, Mona? A very good evening to you. And does this explain the modern leader going way over the top so people believe you're the same person? Good evening to you.
Good evening to you, John. It's great to be here. Well, I wish I had better news, but let's start with your definition of the demagogue, and you're right to cite it historically with the Greeks, and you're right also to note that our founders were quite worried about mobs and about demagogues who are skillful at manipulating the transitory mood of the moment in popular passions and popular will. And so they tried to insulate decision-making in our system a little bit from that kind of... They wanted the voice of the people to be heard. They wanted the government to be responsive, but not too responsive to the popular will. And so we have the Electoral College, so we don't elect our presidents directly, although that has come to be kind of really not that much of a break on popular passion because the electors don't use their own judgment anymore. They simply vote for whoever they
Not recently, Mona. Let's not get ahead of the story. Yeah, not recently.
Good point.
Yes.
And they ensured that senators would be elected every 6 years, and members of the House every 2. The House is the more... And
the senators would be a product of the state legislature and not the direct vote, and that was changed about 100 years ago. Yes, there's been some smoothing out, but we still do have a go-between between the demos and the decision-making, which is the representative.
The idea, anyway. But we've been getting further and further from that founding idea, and The presidency of Barack Obama has been an exercise in really flouting the Constitution and the limits on constitutional power of the executive. This president has sort of rewritten legislation unilaterally, for example, with Obamacare, and said, well, yeah, I know the law says that this is when we're going to have the fee for businesses, but I'm going to change that. I just unilaterally I'm going to change it, or the requirement that people buy insurance and so forth. So that's just one example among many. He also attempted to rewrite environmental legislation through regulation through the EPA, which the Supreme Court just rebutted. He attempted to change immigration law unilaterally, and so on and so forth. And there has been very little rearing up on the hind legs by members of the legislature about this arrogation of power that the president has done. Certainly members of his own party have not protested. Republicans a little bit, but people, I guess, are getting used to this idea that the presidency is everything, and that when you elect a president, you're electing someone to be kind of an emperor who will just remake the country in the image that he likes. And when the whole Trump business began, I remember writing a column way back, I guess, in the summer, saying, well, I guess, for a certain kind of person in the Republican Party, they're saying, okay, we see how it's done. We elect an emperor, so now we want ours. We want our unconstitutional executive to do what we want, build a wall or whatever it is. Although it turns out that's actually not the main thing that's stirring Trump's supporters. But anyway, getting back to the idea of a demagogue, because I do think that the results in New Hampshire are really unbelievably depressing and dismaying, because both parties have turned to people, or at least the plurality of both parties have turned
right. First past the post have turned to, yes.
Yes, exactly. Have turned to people who are telling who are irresponsible, who are playing upon people's worst fears and worst instincts, which is usually what we associate with the word demagogue. Not somebody who is just a voice for the people, but someone who plays upon people's fears and encourages their worst tendencies for his own or her own personal advancement. And so you have Donald Trump saying things like, well, I think we should just take the oil. We should take the oil from these Middle Eastern countries.
Mona, I can't even tell whether you're making it up. It's all realistic to me. That you could say anything, absolutely anything, and I'd believe it.
This is the God's honest truth.
Yes, I understand. Sure, fine, yeah. But fact checking that is very difficult.
Right, I know. It's remarkable. So, and he has recommended killing the wives and children of terrorists, and he has recommended building a wall, and of course, famously making Mexico pay for it. And just yesterday, I think, he was on television. He was asked about how he would handle the problem of Kim Jong-un, North Korean dictator. And now, this is a figure that we ought to be a little careful about, because we don't know how crazy the fellow is. We do know that he has nuclear weapons,
right,
and has been shown to be unstable many times and unpredictable. And Trump was asked about it, and he said, I would have the Chinese get rid of him very quickly, he said. And they said, are you saying assassination? And he said, no, yes, might not be about it. Words to that effect. Now, that's... what can I say, John? I mean, that's
there's the problem. There it is. I mean, yeah. I have European correspondents who write me in a roundabout way, being respectful. Are you kidding? That's really what's going on when
I know.
And Mona, it does. You understand in politics, anytime there's an incident that supports the understanding, the narrative already in place, it's really powerful. And the narrative in place about the United States is that it's immature, that it's a cowboy, that it's reckless, and that it's reckless on the planet, and therefore not to be trusted. And therefore, the European correspondents, German correspondents I have, believe that Trump is a credible leader for the United States of America.
That's the fear. That's the fear. And if the Republican Party cannot manage to pull itself together and mount a serious a serious effort to forestall this, then it's going to destroy the Republican Party, because the overwhelming majority of Republicans do not support him, and he is a threat to everything that the party is supposed to stand for, starting with constitutional limits on the power of the executive,
right,
as we were saying earlier, which he has no history of supporting. Also, he has been a lifelong Democrat.
Mona, he was for Obamacare before he was against it, sort of. He was for gun control before he was against it, sort of.
No one cares. I mean, at least his supporters, they don't.
Well, wait, just a moment now. There's a little voice that's been whispering in my ear for some days. I went back and checked it. I think it's Ben Franklin. It was a Republic if you can keep it. You remember that little whisper he gave us on July 4th? I'm beginning to think that was a long-term curse.
Yes. I mean, that's what we are facing. And look, shall we talk about Bernie Sanders?
Yes,
now?
we will. I having left on that sad note, if we can keep it. Now, Mona, it's impossible to believe that you and I are so lucky to be here at the end, isn't it?
Oh, gosh. Don't say that. We have children.
I understand, but I mean, this has to be a phase we're going through. And it must be social media that makes it too immediate. Remember how you had to wait 24 hours before the cover of the New York Times upset you? Now it's every 4 minutes. All you have to do is check.
That's true. That is
all right. True. So we're going to calm down by talking about Bernie Sanders next, because there are demagogues and then there are demagogues. And whatever the businessman from New York is, Bernie Sanders is not the same. He's very, very different. Very recognizable from the 20th century. It was called Marxism. I'm John Batchelor. Mona Charen of the National Review Online, a new piece on Day of the Demagogues. Remember, demagogue, that's a leader. That is not a bad thing. That's a leader. The Athenians thought of it as a leader. Of course, they didn't have tripartite government. They didn't have checks and balances. They didn't have common law. They certainly didn't have the Supreme Court. They didn't have the fact that the legislature is the first article of the Constitution. Yes, I know that. Demagogues, however, are doing very well in 2016, and we turn to the Democratic side. Mrs. Clinton, despite her struggles, is the presumed 45th president of the United States. That's the bookies. Mrs. Clinton is certainly the presumed, the dominant, the overwhelming choice for the Democrats to be the nominee. Yet, she struggles against Bernie Sanders. Why? Mona, Bernie Sanders has a nice smile and kind of tousled hair. He's very successful maintaining a line that is cheered by the millennials, for example, and even Gen Xers. Why? How? What is it that they're hearing that I'm not hearing?
So a couple of things, perhaps. One is that about 6 months ago in polling, he was very low and she was very high. She's had a very rough 6 months. There's been a nonstop march of news about her being possibly the target of an indictment, that she was completely dishonest about her emails and about her misuse of classified information, and that she was corrupt, and she was self-dealing, and she was making sweet deals for herself and the Clinton Foundation while she was Secretary of State. It has not been a good period for her. And so when you look at these exit polls, and it shows that for people who think, honest and trustworthy, do you think is that an important quality in your candidate? Something like 91 to 9 that those voters preferred Mr. Sanders, Senator Sanders. So that's the first thing, is that she's had a very, very rough period, and it's taking its toll. And then you have to also say that the Democratic Party, I mean, how does she campaign? She campaigns like it's a duty. She gets out there and she says, we have to fight those bad Republicans, and I will fight, and I'll make gains on what President Obama has done, And what does Bernie Sanders do? He says, you are being exploited. He is basically the embodiment of the Occupy Wall Street philosophy, right? So the system is rigged against you, and I'm going to tax those evil billionaires, and I'm going to give you their money. I'm going to give you free stuff, and they're going to pay for it. It's the flip side of the Trump thing. I'm going to build a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. Well, Sanders says, I'm going to give you free college tuition, and the millionaires and billionaires are going to pay for it. and I'm going to give you free medical care. Oh, I'll raise middle-class taxes a little bit, but it's going to be great. It's going to be so efficient, and you'll love it, and you'll be far better off. And and he's the happy warrior, preaching a failed philosophy, a free lunch, basically. Back in the 80s, I remember it was sort of common parlance. People used to say, of course, there's no free lunch when they were talking about government programs, and there were always going to be trade-offs. And if you give with one hand, you have to take with the other. And the piper must be paid. Oh, no, well, that's so old-fashioned. That went out the window. Now we have good old-fashioned demagogues saying, yeah, you can have your free lunch, and somebody else will pay for it, and it's going to be great.
Then, therefore, what we have, these are the captains of the good ship, other people's money. That's what I think you just told me.
That's right.
That other people's money are going to do all these things.
That's right.
It's preposterous, Mona. We're grown-ups. It doesn't compute.
No, we're not.
I don't want to blame. No, these are well-educated young people.
They're not grown-up. No, the people who are supporting Trump and the people who are supporting Sanders, I don't care how old they are not grown-ups, because part of being a grown-up is recognizing that you cannot get things for free, that money doesn't grow on trees, that there are trade-offs for everything. And for example, this fairy tale that Sanders constantly trots out at every campaign appearance about the bankers and how they were bailed out, and now and they tanked the economy through greed, and therefore, which is such a ridiculous fable. I mean, the truth is boring and complicated and multifactorial. Yes, there were bad decisions made by bankers, but government encouraged those bad decisions. Government told bankers they had to make loans to non-credit-worthy borrowers, and that was part of what banks were forced to do.
Mona, we have 30 seconds. Let's turn this over and say it's already happened. The demagogues in the White House. 8 years of that, Mona, would cure a lot of what's wrong in America, because we'd miss what was gone. We'd miss it. It'd be profound miss, and it'd be a struggle.
It would depend on whether people correctly interpreted why they were in the trouble they were in, and that's not so
We've had
clear.
8 years of a wannabe demagogue, and now we're going to get the real thing.
Yes.
Or not. Mrs. Clinton is the 45th president of the United States by the bookies, and I promise you, whatever else Mrs. Clinton is, she is not popular. Mona Charen of the National Review Online, I'm John Batchelor.